I'd been waiting 11 years for my son to call on Father's Day. 11 years of cards sent to an address I wasn't sure he still lived at. 11 years of voicemails that went unreturned. 11 years of standing at the edge of my own family like a stranger at a window, watching a life I used to belong to. Then, last spring, an email arrived. My daughter wanted me at her 50th birthday dinner. I thought it was finally over. The silence, the distance, all of it. I thought I was finally coming home. I was wrong. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from and what's your local time? I'd love to know. My story begins on a Tuesday morning in my apartment in Hamilton, Ontario. Not the Hamilton people romanticize. The East End, near the old Stelco works, where the streets smell like rust when the wind blows east. I'd worked at that plant for 38 years as a millwright. Retired at 63 with a decent pension and a handshake from a supervisor half my age. That was 7 years ago. Now I was 70, and the pension kept the lights on, and the CPP covered groceries if I was careful, and the apartment on Barton Street was small but clean and mine. I woke at 6:30 out of habit. My body still follows the plant schedule. I made coffee in the same percolator I'd used since my wife, Dorothy, and I bought it at the Sears on Upper James back in 1987. Still works. The handle is cracked and wrapped in electrical tape, but it works. Dorothy used to say I could fix anything except my stubbornness. She wasn't wrong. I poured coffee into a mug with a faded Blue Jays logo and stood at the kitchen window. May morning. The maple out front had just leafed out, bright green the way only May can manage before summer dulls everything. A woman walked her dog past the building, a kid on a bike. Life moving forward the way it does, whether you're part of it or not. My living room walls held photographs I hadn't been able to take down. My son, Thomas, at his hockey tournament in Brantford, 17 years old, grinning through a split lip. My daughter Patricia at her university convocation at McMaster, cap slightly crooked, Dorothy adjusting it in the one where they're both laughing. A family photograph from Wasaga Beach, maybe 22 years ago. I'd rented a cottage for a week, couldn't afford much, but we had each other in the lake and Dorothy's potato salad, which Thomas always claimed was the real reason he agreed to family vacations. Thomas would be 44 now. Patricia was turning 50. I'd done the math the way you do when you've been excluded long enough that the numbers become a way of staying connected to people who've stopped connecting to you. How had I become someone they didn't need? I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and went for my walk. Down Barton to Gage Park, through the Rose Garden, back along Main. 50 minutes. Keeps the knees functional and gives me somewhere to go. The park was quiet on weekday mornings, mostly retirees and young mothers with strollers. I passed a man about my age sitting on a bench watching two small children play on the climbing structure. His grandchildren, I assumed. The little girl ran over and showed him something in her palm, a stone, a bug. I couldn't tell. He bent over it like it was treasure. I kept walking. Dorothy used to talk about grandchildren the way some people talk about a trip they're planning, something on the horizon worth moving toward. When Patricia has kids, she'd say, you'll teach them to skate. When Thomas settles down, you'll show them how to change a tire. She had it all planned. She died of a stroke at 61, 8 months before Thomas stopped returning my calls. I've always wondered if her absence gave them permission, like I'd only ever been worth knowing through her. I walked home thinking about that, made oatmeal, checked my email on the old laptop I keep on the kitchen table, bills, a newsletter from the Legion, a notice from my building about parking, and then, at the bottom of the inbox, a message from an address I recognized but hadn't heard from in 2 years. Patricia. The subject line said, "Your invitation." I read it twice before I understood it. Patricia and her husband, Gareth Holloway, were hosting a dinner to celebrate her 50th birthday at their home in Oakville, Saturday, June 7th. Cocktails at 6, dinner at 7. Smart casual attire. A calendar attachment. Nothing personal in the body of the email. "No, I've been thinking of you, Dad." "No, it's been too long. Just the information." Formatted like a business communication, which I supposed it was. I sat with it for a long time. I thought about the Christmas 3 years ago when I drove to Oakville and stood on their front step for 4 minutes before Patricia opened the door and told me it wasn't a good time. Gareth was in the background. I could hear him. Their daughter, Lily, was 5 then, and she peered around her mother's leg and stared at me with the open curiosity children have before adults teach them who to ignore. Patricia closed the door before I could say anything except Merry Christmas. I drove back to Hamilton in the dark. I thought about Thomas's wedding in Niagara on the lake, which I'd found out about from my cousin Margaret at a Canada Day barbecue 2 months after the fact. "Lovely ceremony," she'd said. "The vineyard was beautiful." And then her face changed when she realized, and the pity in her eyes was something I drove home with and couldn't leave in the car. I thought about the birthday cards I'd sent every year, the gifts, a Roots jacket for Lily because I'd seen her shivering at well. I'd seen a photo on Facebook before Patricia changed her privacy settings. A set of good kitchen knives for Patricia, engraved. Books for Thomas. A handmade wooden toy I found at a craft market for Lily's first Christmas. Did she know they came from me? Did she know I existed? Why now? The question sat in my chest like something with weight. I knew better than to let hope in. Hope was what made the Christmas visit hurt so much. I'd gone hopeful and left diminished. So I told myself I was going for information. I was going to understand. Maybe Patricia, at 50, with a daughter of her own, had started to reckon with something. Or maybe not. Either way, I needed to know. 11 years of silence deserved at least that much. I decided I would go, not with hope. With the steady, purposeful resolve of a man who'd fixed enough broken machinery to know that sometimes you open something up just to find out it can't be fixed. That's useful too. I needed a jacket. The blazer I'd worn to Dorothy's funeral still hung in my closet, and it still fit in the shoulders, but the elbows were thin. Thursday morning I took the bus to the Lime Ridge Mall and found a decent navy blazer at the Bay, on sale for $140. A week of groceries. I paid without dwelling on it. The young man at the cash didn't ask why I was buying a blazer alone on a Thursday morning, which I appreciated. Friday I found a gift. I'd thought about it for 2 days. I walked into a kitchen store on King Street and found a hand-thrown ceramic serving bowl, made by a local potter, glazed in deep ocean blue. The woman behind the counter told me the potter worked out of Dundas. $220. I thought of my emergency fund, the one I'd been building since Dorothy died, adding to it in increments of $50 whenever the month allowed. I paid and had them wrap it. Walking home through the May afternoon, I thought about Patricia at 8 years old, determined to make her own birthday cake from scratch. Flour everywhere. Dorothy laughing so hard she had to sit down. "You've got to let her try, Ray," Dorothy said when I offered to help. "She needs to know she can do things herself." Patricia finished the cake. It was lopsided and the icing was uneven, and she was so proud she made us take a photograph before anyone could cut into it. When had Daddy become Dad, and then become nothing at all? Saturday came with overcast skies and the particular cool of an Ontario spring that can't decide if it's done. I shaved carefully, wore the new blazer over a pressed shirt, charcoal trousers, the black dress shoes that had lasted 20 years because I polished them. Small dignities. In the bathroom mirror I saw what I was. 70 years old, hair white now, face mapped with lines, but eyes that were still mine. Still paying attention. I drove. 90 minutes on the QEW from Hamilton to Oakville, the lake appearing and disappearing through the trees to the south. Oakville was another world. I'd been through it, but never really in it. Streets lined with old maples and newer money. Houses set back from the road behind hedges and circular drives. The Holloway's house was on a street near the lake. I almost missed it. The number was small, mounted on a stone pillar at the end of a long interlocked driveway. I pulled in behind a line of cars I recognized from dealership commercials. BMW, Audi, one of those large Mercedes SUVs that cost more than I'd made in my last 5 years at the plant. I sat in my Civic for a moment. Deep breath, steady. The front door was answered by a young woman in catering black who took my name without expression, glanced at a list, and stepped aside. The entrance hall was high-ceilinged with wide plank floors and a pendant light that probably cost as much as my rent. Fresh flowers on a console table. The kind of house where everything had been chosen by someone who got paid to choose things. The party had moved to the backyard, which was less a backyard than a curated outdoor room. A long wooden deck with market lights strung overhead, rectangular tables with white linens, catered food arranged on a side table, charcuterie boards, small toasts with things on them I didn't recognize. 40 or so guests in the clothes of people who didn't have to think about the clothes they wore. I stood at the edge of the deck and scanned the crowd. I saw Patricia near the center of the garden. She was laughing at something a woman beside her had said, champagne in hand, a silk blouse in a shade of deep green. She looked elegant. She looked like someone who had built a life and was comfortable inside it. She looked nothing like the girl with the lopsided birthday cake. I walked toward her. She saw me before I reached her. The laugh tapered off. Something passed across her face, surprise first, then a composure she put on like a coat. She came toward me, leaned in for a brief, near-contact embrace, her hand barely grazing my shoulder. "Dad, you came." Her voice was pleasant, warm the way a hotel lobby is warm. "Of course," I said. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She smiled. "Help yourself to drinks. Food's on the side table." Her eyes were already moving past me to someone else arriving behind me. I should go say hello. And she was gone. I stood there a moment. Then I found a quiet spot at the edge of the deck, near the cedar hedge, and watched. I spotted Thomas across the garden, standing with a group of men his age, all of them holding scotch glasses with the ease of men who hold scotch glasses often. He wore a blazer that fit the way expensive blazers fit. When our eyes met, something happened in his expression, a small adjustment, a deliberate turning of his body to the right, so I was no longer in his sight line. The knife of it was familiar, dull from use, but still sharp enough. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and found a chair at one of the outer tables. I could see the whole garden from there. I could also see, near the back corner, a small girl of about 9 crouched over something in the garden bed. Lily, my granddaughter. She had her mother's coloring and the focused, private intensity of a child doing something that matters only to her. I had never had a conversation with her. I had sent her gifts she may never have known came from me. I had learned her age from a Facebook profile that got locked before her 3rd birthday. She was 9 now, almost 10. She had no idea I was watching her from across the garden. I looked away before it became something I couldn't manage. The dinner was served. I was seated at a table with people I didn't know, a couple from Gareth's work, a friend of Patricia's from university. They were polite, the way Canadians are polite to strangers when the occasion requires it. I learned that Gareth worked in private equity, that Patricia had recently joined the board of a conservation charity, that their daughter Lily was incredibly gifted. I nodded and contributed where I could, which wasn't much. Then Gareth tapped his wineglass. The garden settled. Music from a small speaker turned off. 40 faces turned toward the head table where Gareth stood holding his glass with the assurance of a man accustomed to rooms going quiet for him. 50-something, silver at the temples, the kind of face that appears in annual reports. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate 50 years of this extraordinary woman," he said. Applause. Patricia smiled beside him, composed and radiant. Gareth spoke for a few minutes, funny in the way rehearsed speeches are funny. Then Thomas came up beside him, and the two of them stood together, shoulder to shoulder, and something tightened in my gut the way it used to when a machine started making a sound it wasn't supposed to make. "A lot of you know," Thomas said, "that we've been working on something as a family. Family. I noticed the word. Gareth and Patricia have found a property on the Bruce Peninsula, Tobermory area. The kind of place that doesn't come available often." He paused for the knowing murmurs from people who understood the Bruce Peninsula and what came available there. "We're building something for the family. A retreat. Something that'll be here for Lily's generation and beyond." Gareth picked it up seamlessly. "Total project is roughly $2.4 million. Property, structure, the full development. And as Thomas said, this is for the family. For generations." He smiled. "Which brings us to a family member who's been away from us for too long." He looked directly at me. "Ray." His voice carried across the garden with practiced warmth. "Patricia's father. We're so glad you're here tonight." 40 heads turned. I felt each one. "Come up and join us, Ray." He gestured toward the head table like he was welcoming me home. The instinct was immediate. Something I learned in the plant: when the noise changes, when the vibration in the floor shifts, you don't wait to understand why. You pay attention. I recognized what this was before I could articulate it. The public setting, the witnesses, the warmth engineered for an audience. I stood. I walked to the front of the garden, because to refuse in front of 40 people felt like its own kind of surrender, and because I wanted to look my daughter in the eye. Patricia put her arm around me when I stepped up. For the crowd's benefit, the touch felt like a demonstration. "Dad," she said, smiling at the guests, "we've missed you. We've missed you, after 11 years. Thomas stepped forward, smooth and deliberate. "Dad, we've always wanted you to be part of this family's future. This property, it's not just a cottage, it's a legacy, and we think you should have a stake in it." Gareth produced a folder. We had Thomas draw up the documents. Everything straightforward. He opened it on the table. "We're asking family contributors to participate at $350,000. In return, you'd have full access to the property. Holidays, summers, time with Lily, time with all of us. Time with Lily. There it was. There was the key they'd found, the one door they thought was still unlocked." Thomas held out a pen. I looked at my daughter, the arm around my shoulders, The practiced smile. I looked at Thomas, the pen extended, the documents tabbed and ready prepared long before tonight, prepared before the invitation was ever sent. I looked at Gareth, assured and watchful. I thought about Thomas's wedding I wasn't invited to, the front door at Christmas, 11 years of phone calls that went to voicemail, a granddaughter who didn't know my name, $350,000. Almost exactly what remained in my accounts after I'd paid off the apartment and the car and a lifetime of being careful with money I'd earned in 38 years of physical labor. They had looked into my finances. They had to have. Nobody arrives at that number by coincidence. Something happened inside me. Not collapse, not grief. Something releasing, like a valve finally opened. 11 years of asking what I had done wrong. 11 years of wondering if I had been too much, too little, too working class, too present, too absent. And there was the answer. There was the sum they had decided I was worth. No, I said. The words sat in the quiet garden like a stone dropped in water. Patricia's smile held for a moment by sheer muscle memory. Then it slipped. Dad. Her voice dropped. I think you should take a moment. I don't need a moment. This is an incredible opportunity. Gareth's voice stayed even. The voice of a man who handled setbacks professionally. Access to the property. Time with Lily. Using Lily as leverage is the least decent thing you've done tonight, I said quietly. And you've done several indecent things tonight. Thomas stepped closer. You're making a mistake. We're offering you a way back in. A way back in. I repeated it. If you walk away from this, Thomas. I looked at my son. I've been walking away from your front door for 11 years. You were never home when I arrived. Tonight is the first time in 11 years you've needed me to stay, and the reason is $350,000. I kept my voice level, the way you keep your voice level when you're saying something that cannot be unsaid and you want to be sure it's heard. I won't be signing anything. I stepped back from Patricia's arm, walked across the garden toward the house. I heard Thomas behind me, his voice low. Ray, don't. I didn't turn around. I walked through the house, past the pendant light and the console table with the fresh flowers, and out the front door. I stood on the interlocked driveway in the cool May evening and breathed. Then I got in the Civic and drove back to Hamilton. I didn't cry on the QEW. I'd used up crying years ago. What I felt was colder and cleaner. Clarity. The road back to Hamilton was familiar and dark and mine. At home I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The percolator, the chipped Blue Jays mug, the photo of Dorothy on the windowsill, the good one from Lake Superior. I said something out loud to the empty apartment that I won't repeat, but she would have understood it. Then I opened my notebook and started a list. By morning I had a plan. The first call Monday was to a paralegal named Sandra Okafor, who worked out of an office above a pharmacy on King Street East. I'd used her once for a landlord dispute. She was direct and didn't waste my time. I told her I wanted to update my will, remove both children as beneficiaries, and I wanted documentation of an incident involving potential coercion for my own records. She scheduled me for Wednesday and told me to bring the invitation email. The second call was to my bank. I asked about the process for restructuring accounts and was scheduled for Thursday. I also called a real estate agent. The apartment was rented, not owned, which simplified things. I gave my 60 days notice that week. I'd been thinking about where to go since somewhere around Stony Creek on the drive home the night before. I had a cousin, Martin, who'd retired to the Maritimes. He'd been telling me for 3 years to come out, Prince Edward Island. A town called Summerside, smaller than Hamilton, slower, ocean. I'd never lived near the ocean. I called Martin. He answered on the second ring, and when I told him I was thinking of making a move, he said, "About time, Ray," and meant it. 2 months of preparation. I gave away furniture I didn't need, boxed what mattered. Dorothy's percolator, the photographs, her good mixing bowls, the wooden box her father had built, the things a life actually consists of when you remove everything performative. The phone rang twice during those 2 months. Thomas, the first time, leaving a message that said things had maybe moved too fast at the party and perhaps we could discuss. The second time it was a number I didn't recognize and a woman's voice claiming to be calling about unclaimed funds in an account under Dorothy's name. I hung up without speaking. I recognized the shape of it, the exact amount they'd offered to lower their ask to, mentioned casually as if it were fact. I called Sandra Okafor and told her. She noted it. I changed my cell number, opened a new email account, deactivated the Facebook profile that had been dormant for 4 years anyway. I packed the Civic, loaded the rest into a small moving truck. I drove myself, And on a Thursday morning in August, with the city just starting to heat up, I drove east. Summerside was not what I expected, which was the point. Red roads, actual red roads, the iron-rich soil of the island that turns everything it touches that particular rust. The ocean was not decorative, it was present in a way that changed the light and the smell and the sound of every morning. My rental was a small house on a side street 6 blocks from the water, 100 years old, vinyl-sided sometime in the 80s, with a back porch that looked out over a neighbor's garden. $1,200 a month, which was more than Hamilton, but within my pension and CPP if I was careful. I could be careful. The first week I fixed the screen door, leveled a cabinet in the kitchen that had been pulling to one side for what looked like a decade, and recaulked the bathroom. By the second week, the woman next door, Bay Arsenault, 68, retired school principal, had knocked to ask if I knew anything about porch railings, because hers had developed a concerning wobble. I spent an afternoon on it. We had tea afterward. She had opinions about everything, including the provincial government, the new coffee shop downtown, and the proper way to make chowder, which in her view involved none of the shortcuts that had become fashionable. I didn't disagree. That was how Summerside worked. People were friendly without being aggressive about it. They gave you room to arrive at your own pace, and then they included you when you got there. By October, I was volunteering 2 afternoons a week at the Legion, doing minor repairs and making coffee. By November, I had a Tuesday morning walking group retired fishermen, a former RCMP officer, a woman who'd taught music for 40 years. We walked the harbor boardwalk and talked about the weather and the tides and occasionally about things that mattered. I was Martin now, to most people, not Raymond. Ray had been the name that VP Southerners that came back, the voicemails that weren't returned. Martin was something my name thread, that mother had also called me, her middle name for me when she was pleased. It fit. 6 months passed. Good months. Quiet in the way that restored rather than diminished. The ocean in the morning through the kitchen window. Bee's chowder, which was as good as she claimed. The Legion on Tuesdays. Martin's card games on Friday evenings. A life chosen rather than inherited. Then my phone rang. The new number. The one I'd given to Sandra Okafor, and to Martin, and to no one else. Unknown number. Ontario area code. I answered. Mr. Sullivan, said a man's voice. This is Eric Booth. I'm a lawyer with Hartfield Booth in Toronto, representing your son, Thomas Sullivan. I stood at the kitchen window watching Bee rake leaves in her backyard. How did you get this number? A pause. We had a court order requiring disclosure from your previous legal contact. What do you want, Mr. Booth? He explained it with professional smoothness. Thomas and Patricia had filed a civil claim in Ontario Superior Court. Emotional abandonment of his adult children and grandchildren. Verbal agreement to contribute to a family asset. Damages and costs. I listened to the whole thing. Then I said, I'll be in touch through my own counsel, and ended the call. Sandra Okafor had recommended a litigator in Charlottetown if I ever needed one. I called her that afternoon. She called me back the next morning and told me not to worry more than was useful, which I appreciated, and that I'd need to appear in person in Toronto since the claim was filed in Ontario, which I didn't appreciate but accepted. 3 months later, I drove off the island and flew to Toronto for the first time in years. The courtroom was on University Avenue, the kind of building that communicates solemnity through the quality of its stone and the height of its ceilings. My lawyer, a woman named Cheryl Park who wore a gray suit and carried herself like someone who had been underestimated to good effect throughout her career, met me outside. Thomas and Patricia were already seated at the plaintiff's table with Booth. Gareth was in the gallery. Patricia looked thinner. Thomas looked the same, which was to say he looked like a man who had made a decision and was executing it without reconsidering. The judge was a woman in her 60s, Justice Moreau, gray-haired and precise. She reviewed the filings without expression. Booth led Patricia first. She described, in careful and somewhat rehearsed language, a father who had become difficult after their mother died, demanding, unable to adapt to the distance that naturally develops between adult children and their parents. She described the party as a family effort to reconnect, to include me in something meaningful. She described my refusal and disappearance as a choice to abandon her brother, and her daughter. Justice Moreau interrupted once. Miss Holloway, you testified that efforts were made to maintain contact over the years. What efforts specifically? Patricia hesitated. We sent him updates occasionally, when things were, specifically, Miss Holloway. Calls, messages, visits. It was difficult. We had busy. Yes or no, Miss Holloway? Did you initiate contact in the 18 months prior to this birthday dinner? A pause that lasted long enough to answer the question on its own. Cheryl's cross-examination was efficient. She produced 11 years of records, my call logs, the birthday cards I had kept, the returned envelopes, a habit I couldn't explain except that I'd learned early that keeping records mattered. The gift receipts, a log I'd kept, nothing formal, just dated entries in a notebook. Called Patricia. No answer. Left message. 340 entries over 11 years. The photograph of me on Patricia's front step at Christmas 3 years ago. I'd taken it myself, sitting in the car afterward, without knowing why. A reflex. It showed the door closed in the frame. Cheryl placed Patricia's financial disclosure documents beside my bank records. The amount your client is claiming your father verbally committed to $350,000. That figure corresponds exactly to the balance in your father's accounts at the time of the party, correct? Patricia looked at Booth. That's what we understood was a reasonable contribution. Who provided you with the figure of your father's account balance? Silence. Thomas took the stand next. Cheryl let him speak at length, which he did with the confidence of a man who had prepared thoroughly. Then she asked him about the private investigator. He denied one had been hired. She produced an invoice. The room went quiet in a particular way. I testified last. I kept my eyes on Justice Moreau, and I told her the truth in the order it had happened. Dorothy's death. The years of silence that followed. The Christmas at the front door. The wedding I learned about from a cousin. The gifts I'd sent. The party and the envelope and the stage and the folder with the documents. I said one thing that wasn't strictly chronological. I said that my wife had asked me, in her last weeks, to take care of our children. That I had tried to do that for 11 years. That what I had finally learned was that taking care of yourself is not a betrayal of that promise. It is the only way to honor it. Justice Moreau dismissed the claim entirely. She also had something to say before she adjourned, and she said it directly to Thomas and Patricia, not to the room generally. The language was judicial, but the meaning was plain. They had identified a financial asset and constructed a family occasion around extracting it. The evidence of years of neglect followed by sudden interest when resources were identified was unambiguous. She issued a communication order. Any attempt to contact me outside of a supervised legal process would have consequences. In the hallway, Patricia called my name. I turned. She looked smaller than she had in the garden in June. The composed exterior had cracked somewhere in the last few hours, and what was underneath it was something I recognized. Not the 49-year-old woman who had built a careful life on forgetting where she came from, but the girl who needed to know she could do things herself, who'd made the lopsided cake and been so proud. Dad. Her voice was unsteady. I know there's nothing I can say today, but I need you to know that this was Gareth's idea, the way it was done. I knew it was wrong. I looked at her. Then you should have said so before you sent the invitation. I know. You should have said so when I was standing on your front step at Christmas. She looked at the floor. I know. You had 11 years, Patricia. I turned and walked out. Cheryl touched my arm briefly at the front doors. You did well, she said. I just told the truth, I said. That's usually enough, she said. In my experience, it's rarer than it should be. I flew back to Charlottetown that evening. Martin picked me up at the airport, which I hadn't asked him to do. And on the drive back to Summerside, he asked how it went, and I said it's done, and he said good and turned the radio up, which was the right response. That night I sat on the back porch in the dark with a glass of Glenlivet, Dorothy's Christmas gift to me the year before she died, a bottle I'd been working through for 7 years, at a glass a time for occasions that warranted it. The porch looked out over B's garden, the last of the late-season flowers visible in the dark as pale shapes. Somewhere toward the harbor I could hear the water. I raised my glass. To endings, I said. And to new ones. 9 months later, B knocked on my door on a Saturday morning holding a coffee cake and told me she knew it was my birthday because I had mentioned it once in passing. I said I had done no such thing, and she said, You absolutely did, Martin Sullivan. In October, when we were talking about the weather, and I didn't argue because she was probably right, and also because the cake smelled good, and I hadn't had anyone make me a birthday cake since Dorothy. We sat on the porch, 71 years old. The October light on the red roads, the smell of salt through the last of the leaves. Martin, from down the street, came by. B's son, who was visiting, brought his daughter, who was 4, and who ate cake with great seriousness, and then fell asleep in a porch chair with her shoes still on, which made all of us quiet and grateful. That was the day a card arrived in the mail. Ontario postmark. Patricia's handwriting on the envelope, which I knew the way you know things that were once important. I opened it at the kitchen table after everyone had gone. No legal language, no arguments. Just her handwriting, careful and slightly formal the way she'd always written. She said that Gareth had moved out in the spring, that she had started seeing a therapist, that Lily had asked about her grandfather, and that Patricia had realized she didn't have enough to tell her, that she had begun trying to tell her more, that she didn't expect anything from me, that she was sorry, that she included a photograph. The photograph was from Wasaga Beach, the one I'd thought about in Hamilton, standing at the kitchen window, all of us together, Dorothy adjusting Patricia's hat, Thomas squinting into the sun, me with my arm around Dorothy's shoulders, younger than I'd known I was. I held the photograph for a long time. I put it in the box I keep on the bedroom shelf. Dorothy's watch. My 30-year service pin from Stelco. A smooth stone from the Hamilton beach where I'd walked the morning Dorothy was diagnosed. Things I kept because they were real, because they had happened, because I was the only person left who knew exactly what they meant. I didn't write back, didn't call. The apology was real, I knew her well enough to know that. But apologies are not repairs, they are acknowledgments. They say, I understand now what happened. They don't say, it didn't happen. The door stays closed. Not with anger. Anger would require me to still be waiting for something. I'm not waiting for anything. What I have now is mine in a way that things weren't for a long time. The walks along the harbor, B's opinions about chowder, the Legion on Tuesdays, Martin's card games, the porch in October, the way the island light comes in low in winter and turns everything a particular shade of gold that I've decided is something Dorothy would have loved. She would have liked B. She would have liked Summerside. She would have said, I told you the ocean, because she had once, in the 80s when we were young and the world was still full of places we might live. We chose Hamilton because that was where the plant was, and the work was, and the life we were building was. I don't regret it, but here I am. Sometimes I think about Lily. She would be almost 10 now, or 10 already. I've lost precise track. Growing up in a house that is quieter now, with a mother who is, I hope, telling her stories that are honest. I don't know if I'm in any of them. I hope I'm a small corner of some of them. I hope when she's old enough she makes her own decisions about who she looks for. That's what I can give her from here. The possibility. I don't hate Thomas and Patricia. I want to be clear about that, because people sometimes expect bitterness, and I don't have it anymore. It left somewhere around Moncton on the drive east. What I have is acceptance. They made choices over 11 years that accumulated into something that couldn't be undone by a letter or a courtroom apology. I made my own choices. Mine brought me here. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in it, if you've been sending the cards and leaving the messages and standing at doors that stay closed, I want to say something useful to you. It took me 11 years to understand that waiting is a choice. Every year I waited. I chose waiting. I chose to keep measuring my worth against the silence I got back. That's a terrible arithmetic, and it will exhaust you if you let it run long enough. You're allowed to stop. You're allowed to build a life that doesn't have a hole in the shape of someone who chose not to be there. It will not be the life you planned. But plans made around people who've left are not plans. They're waiting rooms. Choose the ocean, or the mountains, or whatever Summerside means for you. Choose the B's and the Martins who knock on your door because they noticed your birthday without being asked. Choose the Tuesday walks. Choose the porch in October. Choose the morning coffee and the light coming in at that particular angle, and the seagulls and the knowledge that today is yours and you earned it. I'm 71 years old, and I am not who I was in that Hamilton apartment, sitting with an email I was afraid to hope about. That man had more years of patience than any man should need. He deserved better. So do you. If this story reached you, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. These stories matter because people who felt invisible need to hear that invisible is not permanent, that there is a porch on the other side of the long silence, that it is possible, at any age, to sit down with coffee and cake and the good light of an October morning and feel, without qualification or asterisk, that you are exactly where you belong.